Whispers of Runeterra.
The Freljord's endless war. For thousands of years, this frozen realm has been locked in civil conflict, tribes clashing beneath an unnatural, immortal winter. You see Ash and Sejuani on opposite sides, trolls and raiders in constant battle. Yet all of that is only the surface. Beneath the ice, an ancient betrayal still echoes. Essentially, the Freljord is not just cold. Its entire history is a cover-up for a cosmic crime involving the Watchers and a void-like cold that tried to rewrite the world itself. So, how did one remote icy corner of Runeterra become the pivot point for a threat that rivals the void? In order to understand that, you need the full story, in order, with nothing important left out. In the next 67 minutes, we're going to walk chronologically through the Freljord's entire past, from primordial myths of three immensely powerful sisters, to a secret pact beneath the glaciers, to the bridge you know as the Howling Abyss. Every major Freljord event will be connected into a single, continuous narrative. On a cosmic scale, the Freljord is only a snowflake in a storm. Aurelian Sol once forged galaxies and stars across the universe, shaping the heavens far beyond this world. Unknown entities wielded world runes to form Runeterra itself, splitting it into physical and spirit realms. Compared to that, a few warring tribes seem insignificant. But this is the twist. This frozen region and the things buried under its ice may decide the fate of that entire cosmic design. Around the dawn of Freljordian history, long before Ash's bow or Sejuani's boar, three sisters rose: Avarosa, Serilda, and Lysandra. Together they united scattered mortals against distant frozen gods, known as the Watchers. The Watchers were not just spirits of winter, they were world-ending entities whose presence warped reality into lifeless, perfect stillness. I'm only speculating here, but their influence may be why the Freljord's winter never truly ends. The legends you hear in current times say the sisters simply fell out, that pride and ambition shattered their unity. But the truth, buried and rewritten, is far darker. Lysandra struck a secret bargain with those things under the ice. The sacred meeting place that would become the Howling Abyss turned into a prison door, sealing the Watchers in a tomb of frozen magic. From that night onward, everything changed. Avarosa and Serilda died. Their people splintered into the ancestors of the Avarosan, the Winter's Claw, and the Hidden Frost Guard. Lysandra erased songs, altered myths, and reshaped memory itself. Today, Ash, Sejuani, and the Frost Guard all move as pieces on a board that was set thousands of years ago. So if the Freljord's history has been rewritten and forgotten, what actually happened on the night one sister sold the world to the things beneath the ice? Runeterra, magic, and the frozen corner of the world. To answer that, you have to zoom out from one snowy night in the north to the structure of the entire cosmos. The Freljord's secret starts long before three mortal sisters, with a dragon of stars and a world that refused to behave. In the beginning, Aurelian Sol forged suns and constellations as a craftsman of the heavens. Most worlds he passed were quiet, predictable, and thin. Magic was a whisper. Runeterra was different. So how did this one world stand out to an ancient stellar entity? Its essence was dense, volatile, and restless, a place where raw magic pooled so thickly that reality itself became flexible. On Runeterra, ideas could harden into matter. Emotions could scar the land. In order to shape this unstable world into something survivable, unknown, immensely powerful entities created tools. The world runes. A world rune is not just a spell. It is a fragment of the rules of existence, a primal reality-editing artifact that can raise mountains, redirect oceans, or erase a civilization in a single, precise act. Essentially, the early shapers of Runeterra used these runes to carve continents, stabilise climates, and divide the world into different layers of being. Even though you will not see a world rune sitting in the Freljord's snow in current times, their legacy explains why the region matters. Any realm born from that much raw editing draws cosmic attention. It is a fault line in creation, and the Freljord sits right on it. One of the biggest edits was the split between the physical and spirit realms. On the surface, you have ice, stone, and mortal tribes struggling to survive. Beneath and beside that, you have a parallel realm of concepts and archetypes, where animal totems and demigods embody the environment itself. Anivia is not just a big bird, she is the cycle of winter's death and rebirth. Orn is the forge fire buried under the mountains. Volibear is the storm and the untamed predatory wild. In the Freljord, those spiritual forces bleed into the snow. That is where you meet one of the key metaphysical elements of this story: true ice. Ordinary ice is just frozen water. True ice is magic made solid, an impossibly cold substance that slows, preserves, and imprisons. Weapons of true ice never melt. Walls of it can trap not only bodies, but thoughts, memories, and spirits. When people speak of the Freljord's winter, they mean more than weather. There is physical cold, but there is also a spiritual winter, stagnation, silence, and the numbing of history itself. I'm only speculating here, but you can think of every blizzard as a tiny echo of a deeper cosmic freeze. So, how did a living world end up with a land locked in near-permanent ice? The answer is that it was not supposed to be this way. The Freljord's eternal winter is a scar. Long ago, something tried to overwrite Runeterra's flexible reality with a single lifeless template, frozen, still, and obedient. The attempt failed, but not completely. The land remained wounded, the realms grew thin, and beneath the true ice, the authors of that frozen template never truly left. And when three sisters reached into that wound, they did not just find power, they found the things that made it. Ancient powers, demigods, spirits, and things that should not wake. What reached back was not just power, it was a crowd of older, hungrier things that had been here long before the three sisters ever dreamed of ruling the north. In the earlier stages of the Freljord, the land answered to demigods. These were immensely powerful entities that stood somewhere between spirit and God, shaping how mortals understood survival. Orn, the great forge god, withdrew into his volcanic halls, believing strength came from craft, endurance, and self-reliance. Anivia, the cryo-phoenix, circled high above, a spirit of rebirth and cycles, teaching that death and disaster could lead to renewal. Volibear, the thunder's roar, crashed through storms and battlefields, preaching that only conflict, blood, and raw instinct could carve a place in this frozen realm. So, how did these beings actually interact with mortals? In those ancient days, they walked almost openly. Orn raised hearths and weapons for early tribes, then abandoned them to see whether they could maintain what he had given. Anivia's appearances became omens. A village crushed by avalanche might later find fertile ground revealed beneath the snow. Volibear tore down weak settlements with lightning and claws, then watched which survivors adapted or died. Entire cultures formed around these encounters, but over generations, clear memories blurred into myth, and myth into tools for politics. Essentially, each demigod embodied a philosophy of how to live in a world that wants you dead. In order to justify their wars, later leaders would claim Anivia's blessing for unity, Orn's legacy for stoic independence, or Volibear's approval for ruthless conquest. I'm only speculating here, but you can already see how Ash's diplomacy, the Winter's Claw brutality, and even isolated mountain clans echo those ancient lessons, whether they remember the source or not. Beyond these northern gods, Runeterra itself is haunted by another category of beings, demons of pure emotion. They are not tied to one region, they are tied to what mortals feel. Fiddlesticks is the clearest example, a living knot of fear that manifests where terror is strongest. Other unnamed demons feed on pain, obsession, or joy twisted into mania. They do not want your land or your allegiance. They want your feelings, your stories, your nightmares. The Watchers are something else entirely. They are not spirits of emotion, but cold intelligences from beyond reality, closer to the void than to any god. When they first touched the Freljord, they saw Runeterra as raw material to be reforged into a single frozen pattern. No change, no choice, no life. The eternal winter you see in the north is the scar of that attempt. Champions you know are already entangled with these forces. Volibear still prowls storms, furious that mortals and even other gods have grown weak. Anivia continues to die and rise, quietly guiding those who still listen. And Lysandra, she stands at the intersection of demigods, demons, and watchers, serving none of them fully, yet bound to all. In current times, her secret decisions about which power to awaken or betray may decide whether the Freljord remains a brutal homeland, or becomes the first piece of a remade frozen world. But before you can understand her betrayal, you need to see the last time the North actually stood united against the dark under the ice. How we measure an ice age. The Freljord on the Runeterran timeline. To understand that last moment of unity, you need a clock. Not a Freljordian sundial buried in snow, but the calendar most historians in this world actually use. Runeterra's history is usually measured on the Noxian calendar. Essentially, everything is dated as BN and AN, before Noxus and after Noxus. Noxus grows into such an immensely powerful empire that its founding becomes the central axis. So, how did this help you read the Freljord? In order to place its frozen legends next to Shurima's rise, the Rune Wars, or the Ruination, you have to pin its sagas onto that BN to AN line. When we talk about the age of the Three Sisters, we are not in recent history. We're thousands of years BN. Long before the first Noxian warlord marches, before Demacia is a dream, the North is already ancient. Avarosa, Cyrilda and Lysandra walk a realm where trolls, demigods and forgotten entities still roam the tundra. Their first contact with the Watchers, the attempt of those void-like beings to remake the world into a lifeless glacier, and the original shattering of the North all belong to this deep-time BN era. Here's the problem. The timeline is cracked. Lysandra personally breaks it. After her betrayal, she erases records, rewrites songs, and turns oral histories into weapons. Dates blur, exact years vanish, but the relative order of events remains strangely consistent across surviving sources. I'm only speculating here, but that consistency suggests she wanted mortals to remember the pain of division, just not the true cause. So, how will this video move through that broken chronology? We'll start even earlier than the Three Sisters, in the mythic prehistory, when the Freljord is just a wild frozen frontier shaped by primal magic and half-remembered old gods. From there we rise into the era of Avarosa, Cyrilda and Lysandra uniting the tribes, then hit the first great war against the Watchers under the ice. Then comes the pivot, Lysandra's secret pact, the catastrophe that creates the howling abyss, and the moment the bridge you run Aram on stops being a sacred meeting place and becomes a prison lock. After that, we follow the fallout, the deaths of Avarosa and Cyrilda, the splintering of their followers, and the slow crystallization of the three modern factions that in current times you recognize as Ashes Avarosans, Sejuani's Winter's Claw, and the Frost Guard. Pattern interrupt for you. The The Frostguard don't sit outside this timeline as neutral observers. They are Lysandra's instrument inside the AN era, quietly steering conflicts so the Freljord never fully unites again. By anchoring all of this, from primordial BN betrayals to AN political manoeuvring, on one mental timeline, you'll start to see patterns. Patterns that hint the Freljord's endless war isn't a tragic accident of harsh climate and stubborn chiefs, but a carefully maintained distraction, serving something buried far beneath the ice. Before the Sisters, a wild north of gods, beasts, and first tribes. If the Freljord's endless war is a maintained distraction, you have to ask, distracted from what? To answer that, you need to roll the timeline back to before anyone spoke of three sisters, when the North was less a nation and more a frozen, haunted frontier. In those ancient centuries, the Freljord was raw survival, scattered human bands huddled in bone and hide camps, moving with the herds and the storms. Every valley was its own realm. There were no kings, only chiefs who lived one blizzard away from extinction. Monsters, trolls, ice serpents, yeti, and stranger spirits with too many eyes roamed freely. A single night's snowfall could erase an entire tribe, and no one in Runeterra would ever know they'd existed. Amid this chaos, something new appeared among the mortals. Some children were born who did not freeze. They could walk bare-armed through killing winds, touch translucent blue crystal that burned others to ash, and live. These were the first Iceborn. Essentially, they were a mystery wrapped in frostburn, ordinary in blood, but somehow attuned to the unnatural winter and the immensely powerful entities sleeping beneath it. So, how did they gain that resistance? No one in that era had the language of Void, Watchers, or World Runes to even ask. While humans struggled, the demigods of the North moved according to their own designs. Orn, the solitary forge god, carved halls into mountains and hammered weapons in magma-heated foundries, occasionally leaving behind an anvil or blade that could turn a starving clan into conquerors. Volibear the Stormbear prowled the skies and tundra, gathering blood-hungry followers into thunder-worshipping warbands. Where his paws fell, forests uprooted and battlefields drowned in lightning. Anivia, the Cryophoenix, soared above it all, dying and returning in cycles of rebirth, appearing in dreams or snow-swirled omens to warn, to guide, or simply to remind mortals that winter could also mean renewal. In order to survive this landscape, early tribes built their identities around whichever power they trusted or feared most. Some formed proto-factions that tried to imitate Anivia's patience and foresight, favouring negotiation between camps and shared winter stores. Others embraced Volibear's creed, strength, storm, and the right of the fiercest to rule. You can already see the outlines of later Avarosan-style diplomacy and Winter's Claw brutality here, centuries before those names existed. I'm only speculating here, but it's very likely that Iceborn leaders became natural focal points for these philosophies. A chieftain who could wield true ice without dying felt chosen, whether by gods or by the land itself. Around them, myths crystallized. Some claimed Orn had tempered their souls in secret furnaces. Others whispered that the Stormbear had bitten their hearts. This was the Freljord before unification, fractured, god-haunted, and ruled by weather, not by law. No one thought of binding all these rival cults, spirits, and tribes under a single banner. That idea would have sounded insane, and that's exactly why the next development is so important. From this blizzard of competing powers, 3 extraordinary Iceborn sisters, Avarosa, Cyrilda, and Lysandra, would emerge and attempt something no mortal had ever dared: to turn the wild north from a battlefield of surviving tribes into a coordinated force with one vision. The question is, whose vision would it truly be? The Rise of the Three Sisters, Avarosa, Cyrilda and Lysandra. To understand why that question matters, you need to meet the three sisters not as legends, but as real powers walking an ancient, half-frozen realm. Avarosa was the first face most tribes saw. She wasn't the strongest fighter or the most terrifying sorceress, but she had something rarer in the Freljord. People trusted her. She could walk into a longhouse where raiders, shamans, and even half-seen spirits were ready to kill each other and somehow make them share a fire. So, how did she do that in a world built on grudges? Essentially, Avarosa treated every rival as a future ally, promising a united Freljord where no child would starve in the snow because another tribe hoarded food. In order to make that dream survive contact with reality, she needed a war leader. That was Cyrilda. Where Avarosa spoke of peace, Cyrilda understood that peace meant nothing unless you could defend it. Around this time, she forged a reputation as an immensely powerful warrior and tactical genius, shattering demigod servants of the old winter spirits in open battle. When a tribe refused Avarosa's talks, Cyrilda broke their champions on the ice, then offered them a place under the sisters' banner. Unity in her hands became something you could see on the battlefield. Shield walls of once rival clans standing together against monsters and ancient entities. The third sister, Lysandra, moved in colder spaces. She was iceborn in the deepest sense, her blood humming with magic that resonated with the glaciers themselves. Lysandra dreamed, and in her dreams she saw paths through the blizzards of time, possible futures, shifting fates. I'm only speculating here, but you can imagine how intoxicating that must have been, to watch the whole world of Runeterra as if it were a pattern in the frost. At first, she used those visions for the same purpose as her sisters, steering migrations, averting famines, guiding warbands to where their power would matter most. Together, they forged something the Freljord had never truly known, a golden age. Tribes that once raided on sight now marched beneath a single standard. The wild demigods of the north, from ursine war spirits to tundra behemoths, either retreated into distant caverns or grudgingly accepted this new order. Sacred sites, including the great bridge that would one day be called the Howling Abyss, became neutral ground where shamans and chieftains swore oaths of shared purpose. But beneath that triumph, Lysandra's dreams were changing. Night after night, she felt a presence pressing against the underside of the world, something vast moving in the black ice far below mortal history. So, how did a united Freljord look to entities that wanted to remake the realm into silent, perfect cold? To them, it was an obstacle. And one sister was already starting to wonder whether her family's bright, fragile vision could ever survive what she had seen waiting in the depths. The moment she tried to answer that question, the Freljord's golden age began to crack. First contact. The Watchers gaze upon the Freljord. First contact. The Watchers gaze upon the Freljord. When the crack began, it wasn't in stone or ice. It was in perspective. You've seen the Freljord as harsh, heroic tundra, home to tribes and demigods. But to the things watching from outside reality, it was something else entirely. An error. The Watchers were not gods in any shape mortals would recognize. They were vast, formless intelligences adrift in the void like nothing beyond the known realms. No bodies, no borders. Only thought stretching across a darkness where concepts such as time and distance barely mattered. So how did such entities even notice a single cold continent on Runeterra? They sensed it as pattern, a flawed, noisy pattern. From their vantage, the world's living chaos was offensive. Every heartbeat, every storm, every act of mortal will was a kind of static. In order to them, perfection meant stillness, silence, a frozen symmetry where nothing changed and nothing resisted. Essentially, Runeterra was a tangled knot of magic and motion that begged to be simplified into absolute glacial calm. The Freljord, though, stood out. Its intense magical cold, its fields of true ice, were not just scenery, they were a beacon. True ice is more than frozen water. It is crystallized, ordered magic, an immensely powerful lattice that remembers and channels the world's energies. In the far north, those lattices grew so dense that the boundary between Runeterra and the void-adjacent realms thinned. Imagine a frozen window in a dark house. The Freljord was the frost on that glass, and the Watchers pressed their awareness against it. Contact began as dreams. Lysandra started waking with frost on her lashes, and memories she knew were not her own. In sleep, she walked beneath the glaciers, through endless halls of blue-black ice, where towering shapes loomed just beyond sight. They did not speak with voices. They impressed meanings directly into her mind, offers of power, of knowledge, of safety from a greater doom she could not yet name. She saw visions of wars yet to come, of empires burning far to the south, of the void itself gnawing holes in the realm. I'm only speculating here, but this may have been the echo of Icathia's future catastrophe, bleeding backward through non-linear void perception. To a mortal it felt like prophecy. To a watcher it was simply reading another angle of the same fractured reality. At this stage the watchers could not simply step through the ice and walk the world. Runeterra was wrong for them. Too warm, too fluid, too full of independent wills. They needed conduits, minds, and magics willing to align with their purpose. They needed agreements, rituals, and environmental changes to make the realm more hospitable, more frozen, more ordered, more still. So, how did Lysandra interpret these impossible visitors? To her, they were the only entities offering a plan that extended beyond tribal feuds and fleeting mortal lifespans. Her sisters trusted mortal strength, the courage of united clans, the promises of ancient Freljordian spirits. The Watchers promised something else, a world locked forever beyond fear, beyond hunger, beyond surprise. But to reach that safety, something fundamental would have to break. The ice would have to deepen, the realm would have to change. And Lysandra would have to decide whether she stood with her sister's fragile living hope, or with the cold, perfect silence staring back at her from beneath the glacier. The choice she made next would turn a sacred meeting place into a cosmic prison, and the Freljord's golden age into the first chapter of an endless war no one remembers clearly anymore. The first war against the frozen gods, beneath the ice. What followed that choice was not peace, but the first true war for the soul of the Freljord. The realm itself began to scream. You can see the first signs in the sky and in the ice long before any army marches. Unnatural storms coil over the tundra, spiraling in perfect, impossible patterns. Blizzards blow against the wind. Sheets of true ice start spreading out from the oldest glaciers, not melting even when touched by fire or demigod blood. And then the stranger things begin. Hunters walking in circles for days, hearing voices from beneath their own footsteps. Shamans freezing mid-chant as their minds are flooded with visions of a world made of nothing but frost and silence. Essentially, the Watchers are testing their reach, pressing thought and cold through hairline cracks in the foundations of Runeterra. So, how did the Freljord answer? Avarosa and Serilda move first. Around this time, the tribes are still united in purpose, if not in temperament. Avarosa calls the scattered mortals to her banner with promises of survival and shared fire. Serilda forges warbands and oaths, hammering them into disciplined hosts. In order to stand against entities that can freeze an army with a notion, they need more than mortal spears. They seek out the ancient demigods of the north, Anivia, the Crier Phoenix, agrees to help, wheeling above their mustering camps, her wings calming storms and lending shape to the chaos of the sky. Orn, buried in his volcanic forge, grants them weapons of metal that can bite even true ice, though he refuses their counsels and wants nothing to do with their politics. Volibear is different. He revels in the unnatural lightning and broken weather, seeing in this upheaval a chance to remake the world by tooth and claw. He fights the Watcher's influence when it threatens his own dominion, but he also tears through mortal ranks, punishing any who, in his view, have grown soft. Then the enemy finally shows itself. The first manifestations of the Watchers are not clean, godlike forms. They are colossal, half-formed shapes bulging against reality, as if the sky were a membrane about to tear. Ice bends around them at wrong angles, sound stretches, colours mute. Entire battalions lock in place as an invisible thought passes over them, their eyes frost, their wills erased. I'm only speculating here, but this is probably the moment when many Freljordian myths about the cold thinking back are born. Lysandra stands beside her sisters on these battlefields. At least, that is what everyone believes. Her mastery of ice magic lets her redirect killing blizzards, shatter frozen constructs, and seal fissures where the Watchers' minds bleed through. Yet, in the quiet between assaults, she reaches out beneath the ice, holding silent conversations with the very entities they are resisting. The Watchers offer her a frozen eternity without pain, a perfected world without change. To someone who fears loss more than death, that promise has immense power. The united Freljord does push them back. Demigods bleed, tribes are shattered, and the sacred meeting place over the deepest crack is remade into a vast, rune-laced bridge, the first shape of what you know in current times as the Howling Abyss. Victory seems possible, but only through unthinkable sacrifice, endless war, countless lives, and a prison that must never fail, or through accepting a different kind of bargain. And Lysandra is already deciding which cost she prefers. The Pact of Betrayal, Lysandra sells the world for survival, the bargain. At the edge of the Howling Abyss, as runes flare and the ice groans, Lysandra decides that one impossible cost is still too low and reaches for something far worse. Her visions are the key. Lysandra does not just dream, she sees. Endless winters and brief thaws, tribes uniting, then shattering, demigods rampaging through mortal camps, entire valleys erased by wild magic. Again and again, the same pattern: hope, war, ruin. So, how did that shape her? Over centuries of foresight, she becomes convinced that Avarosa's unity and Cyrilda's honour are only pauses in an endless cycle. In her mind, the Freljord is doomed to repeat itself until nothing is left. Then the Watchers speak. These immensely powerful entities from beyond the known realm do not bargain in human terms. They offer an ending to endings. In order to stop change, they will stop almost everything. Their promise is simple and horrifying. Reshape Runeterra into a frozen, static world where motion, growth, and history barely exist. No change means no escalation. No escalation means no war. Essentially, they will turn the world into a monument of ice. In return, Lysandra and a chosen few will be remade, shielded from the cold that kills all others, gifted with magic and near immortality to oversee this silent order. I'm only speculating here, but it's very possible that to Lysandra this feels less like treason and more like surgery on a diseased world. The moment of betrayal comes as Avarosa and Cyrilda lead the charge. On the surface, the sisters stand united, their hosts arrayed along the vast, rune-laced bridge. Below, the first Watchers push against reality, their forms too immense to fully emerge, while her sisters pour their strength into sealing the rift, Lysandra does the opposite. She secretly opens deeper channels, guiding the invading power away from the crack and into the heart of the Freljord itself. Ice answers. Not the natural blizzard that mortals know, but true ice, jagged, luminous, saturated with alien will. Armies flash freeze mid-charge, expressions of fury and courage locked forever in crystal. Banners stop mid-snap. War cries become silent sculptures in the air. Entire landscapes twist into spires and labyrinths of frozen magic as the Watchers attempt to overwrite reality, turning history into a static mural. In that instant, centuries are amputated, possible futures, branching paths, all sliced off and sealed inside the glacier that will define the Freljord in current times. The howling abyss becomes less a battlefield and more a hinge in the world's fate, a lock slammed shut by Lysandra's own hand. But here is the uncomfortable question. Did she truly believe this was the only way to save her people from endless suffering? Or was there always a hidden part of her that craved the control, the secrecy, and the immortality the Watchers promised? The howling abyss, from sacred meeting place to cosmic prison. Whether Lysandra was saviour or architect of control, the place where she made her stand was not always a wound in the world. Long before it was called the Howling Abyss, that site was a sacred convergence point. It was neutral ground in the harshest land on Runeterra, a place where rival tribes, shamans, and even demigod spirits could meet without drawing blades. So, how did a holy meeting ground turn into the frozen death bridge you recognise from Aram? The answer lies in the nature of the realms themselves. At this point in ancient Freljordian history, the boundary between the physical world and the spirit realm there was thin but stable, a natural crossroads. Priests of many tribes performed rituals on the plateau, calling on the old gods of wind and frost, because this was where magic answered most easily. When the Watchers finally tried to emerge, they focused their immense power on that exact weakness. Their attention was a cosmic lens. Reality buckled. The sacred plateau shattered, ripping open a vast chasm that plunged into blackness. One colossal Watcher forced itself through, only to be caught mid-emergence as the world screamed and the temperature plunged. The result is the frozen titan you see beneath the bridge in game, a gigantic, half-trapped entity, its form buried in layers of ice and true ice. Lysandra saw what their full arrival would mean, not conquest, but total rewriting. Entire histories erased, mortals reduced to frozen concepts. In order to stop that, she did the only thing she believed was still possible. She turned on her own gods. She sacrificed her armies, her followers, and even her remaining sister allies, channeling their deaths into a catastrophic surge of frost magic. I'm only speculating here, but the scale of that spell may have rivaled a world rune in localized impact. That reversal refroze the breach and slammed the Watchers back beneath the torn crust of the Freljord, yet it could not undo the chasm. So Lysandra chose to weaponize the wound. Over years and then centuries, her frost guard layered wards, runes and true ice over the gap, shaping a bridge that was never just a bridge. Essentially, it became a key turned sideways, a seal and a monument fused together. Every carved sigil, every shard of true ice is part of a ritual binding that keeps the prison door from fully opening. In current times, that prison is exactly where you load into an ARAM match. The endless howling wind. Those are the pressures of two realms grinding against each other above a suppressed void-like presence. The scattered Freljordian relics and crumbling statues along the lane are the remnants of the ancient meeting ground and later Frostguard fortifications. And the frozen titan you glimpse under the boards is not scenery, it is a Watcher, still reaching. So the next time your champion is thrown into a 5v5 on that narrow bridge, remember every clash of steel and spell is happening atop a cosmic lock. But what happens if that lock is weakened on purpose? The shattering, death of the sisters, and the birth of endless winter. What happens is that the lock works by almost breaking the world. When Lysandra slams the metaphorical door on the Watchers, the backlash is catastrophic. Their immense alien magic does not simply vanish, it ricochets through the ice. Shockwaves of impossible cold race out from the howling abyss, turning storms into weapons and snow into stone. In a matter of moments, the Freljord's harsh winter is deepened and fixed into place. Essentially, the whole northern realm is flash frozen into the climate you see in current times. So, how did that look on the ground to mortals who had no idea what a Watcher even was? Around the sisters' armies, glaciers buckle and race forward. Seas seize into jagged plates. Creatures that were mid-stride are frozen where they stand, turned into statues of rime and hoarfrost. This is not a natural ice age slowly creeping in. It is an arcane detonation that stabilizes into a permanent state. In order to keep the imprisoned entities bound, the magic has to keep flowing, so the land itself becomes the conduit. In the chaos, Avarosa and Serilda die. But how, exactly, is one of the most contested questions in Freljordian myth. Some songs insist Lysandra betrayed them at the last second, encasing them in black ice as payment to the Watchers. Others whisper that the Watchers lashed out directly, striking the two sisters down as they tried to hold the rift closed. There are even tales that they were simply overwhelmed, buried, and frozen by the very storm they had unleashed. I'm only speculating here, but that confusion is not accidental, because Lysandra survives, and she controls the story. Wounded and half-consumed by the same magic that freezes the continent, she does something no sane person would. She embraces the ice. She lets it fill her veins, slow her heart, and remake her followers. Those who submit become the first frost guard, bound to the howling abyss and rendered effectively immortal. Their lives are stretched out by the unnatural cold that nearly ended the world. Death of the sisters above, unending life for the cult below. With Avarosa and Serilda gone, the political and spiritual centre of the Freljord shatters. The dream of a single, united North dies in the same instant they do. Tribes that once marched under one banner splinter into rival hosts. Demigods and ancient spirits either withdraw into the deep wilds or rampage across the new ice fields, no longer checked by the sisters' authority. What had been a coordinated civilization collapses into scattered warbands and competing myths. Here is the core irony. The Freljord's eternal winter, which its people experience as a curse of the land or punishment from distant gods, is actually collateral damage. It is the side effect of a prison meant to save Runeterra from something far worse than blizzards or famine. So, how did that prison turn into an endless civil war? The answer lies in what Lysandra does next with those broken tribes, and how she weaponizes their forgotten history. Erasing history. Lysandra rewrites the songs of the North. Lysandra understands something most rulers never live long enough to learn. If you control memory, you control the war forever. In order to turn a one-time catastrophe into a permanent smokescreen, she doesn't just bury bodies under the ice, she buries stories. Her strategy is slow, patient, and immensely cruel. She has immortality. The Frost Guard have temples, libraries, and the trust of half the realm. So, how did she use that combination of magic and time to erase an entire age? She starts where the Freljord keeps its history, in songs, sagas, and sacred rituals, not in books. A skald who remembers too much about the three sisters is quietly invited to serve at a Frostguard sanctuary. Their most dangerous verses are corrected into safer versions, then taught back to the tribes as ancient truth. Over centuries, the core myths are split and scrambled. The story of three united sisters defeating immensely powerful entities from beyond the world becomes three competing legends. In one village, Avarosa dies because Serilda betrays her. In another, Serilda is murdered by Avarosan treachery. In a third, both are tricked by vague southern sorcerers. The constant? Lysandra is distant, almost saintly, a wise witch who withdraws to protect the Freljord from some unnamed horror. Essentially, she edits herself out of the crime and back in as a guardian. The moment of her pact with the Watchers is never sung. The Howling Abyss is no longer remembered as the place where the sisters first parleyed with those frozen gods, but as a tragic battlefield or a holy wound in the ice. The idea that the three sisters once stood together against the Watchers, and that one of them switched sides, survives only as broken, contradictory images. To make that stick, the Frostguard reinvent themselves as lawkeepers. They claim the right to protect all truly ancient sites. The Howling Abyss, forgotten shrines, buried weapon caches from the First War. They hoard relics and carved records in remote fortress monasteries, far from ordinary mortals. If an Avarosan shaman wants to see a runestone older than her grandmother, she must ask the Frostguard. The answer is usually no, or a carefully guided tour with explanations already rewritten. In current times, the result is a Freljord that half remembers its own birth. Tribes recall heroic founders with legendary bows and spears, and they whisper about some great shattering of the world, but the Watchers themselves are missing from almost every tale. Lysandra's original pact is not debated, it simply does not exist in common memory. I'm only speculating here, but there are hints that this distortion goes even deeper. Some demigod legends in the north, stories of towering shapes in the blizzard, of voices that freeze thought, might actually be misremembered encounters with Watcher-touched phenomena, not true gods at all. If those myths were ever clearer, the Frostguard had thousands of years to blur them. So, how does a realm fight for its future when it doesn't know what it's really fighting? The answer becomes clear once you see how those edited stories push every tribe toward the same convenient enemy, each other. From one people to three, Avarosan, Winter's Claw, and Frostguard. Those edited stories don't just confuse the past, they manufacture sides. Out of one shattered memory of three sisters, you suddenly get three very different futures for the Freljord. The first future grows out of Avarosa's name. In the oldest songs that survive the censors, Avarosa is remembered as the sister who wanted everyone at the fire, human tribes, yeti, even reformed raiders. So, how did that turn into a modern political movement? Essentially, scattered clans, each carrying a fragment of that ideal, begin to rally around a single banner that promises unity without domination. In order to survive an eternal winter, they argue, strength has to be shared, not hoarded. That coalition will eventually be called the Avarosan. They revive the idea that the Freljord was once one people, guided by a queen who died trying to keep it that way. In current times, Ash embodies this myth almost perfectly. A war leader who prefers treaties, who uses magic icebow relics not just as weapons, but as symbols of a lost, more peaceful realm. To an Avarosan, Avarosa is a martyr of unity murdered by jealous rivals, and every new alliance is a small act of resurrection. Serilda's legacy goes in the opposite direction. Where Avarosa's memory softens into diplomacy, Serilda's hardens into rage. Her followers remember a warrior who was betrayed, frozen, and shattered for being too honest about what the Freljord really is, a graveyard that only respects strength. Over centuries, that story twists into an ethos. If the world will kill you anyway, you strike first, take what you need, and never apologize. From that comes the Winter's Claw. They glorify raiding, endurance, and brutal pragmatism. Mercy is seen as another word for weakness. I'm only speculating here, but you can feel Serilda's bitterness every time Sejuani rejects Ash's offers of peace. To Sejuani, the land is dying. Ancient entities still stir beneath the ice, and soft words won't stop a tusk from goring you. Her answer is simple: hit harder or be buried. The third path is colder than both. The Frost Guard present themselves as neutral priestesses and wardens, a mystical order living among black stone spires and old Freljordian magic. Publicly, they claim to watch the howling abyss and guard against unnamed ancient threats. Their prophecies are vague, their rituals secret, and their history conveniently incomplete. Behind that curtain stands Lysandra. Her cult maintains the prison of the Watchers, edits every scroll it can reach, and quietly decides which myths each tribe is allowed to keep. Avarosans hear of a saintly unifier. Winter's Claw hear of glorious betrayal and the holiness of strength. The Frost Guards speak only in half-truths about the three and the deep, never mentioning the day their founder sold the world of mortals to beings under the ice. These contradictions are not an accident. By ensuring no single narrative ever dominates, Lysandra keeps the Freljord fractured, forever arguing over which ghost of the past is real. And while Ash and Sejuani fight over whose ancestor was right, the one sister no one remembers properly is free to prepare for the moment the prison under the howling abyss finally cracks. The long quiet war, millennia of raids, myths, and frozen stalemates. This is the part of the story where everything goes quiet. Not peaceful, just routine. After the shattering of the Three Sisters' alliance, the Freljord settles into an ancient pattern of tension that never fully explodes and never fully ends. For thousands of years BN and into early AN, raids become a season, not a crisis. Avarosan-descended clans raid Winter's Claw herds in the thaw. Winter's Claw retaliate in the deep freeze. Knotted tree lines and half-frozen rivers turn into unofficial borders. So, how did people live in a realm where war is just background noise? Essentially, you grow up knowing your cousins might be on the other side of a spear, and you still share songs with them when the blizzards trap everyone in the same cave. Temporary alliances flare up whenever a bigger threat appears. A troll king rises in the north, or an ice drake nests too close to a village, and suddenly sworn enemies march together for a season. Then, once the immediate danger is gone, those pacts melt away, and the old feuds re-freeze. In order to survive, tribes learn to treat loyalty as flexible and memory as selective. Over this long, quiet war, demigods do not disappear. They just become rare storms on the horizon. Volibear, the storm bear, periodically tears across the tundra, smashing forts, uprooting carved totems, and inspiring berserker cults that swear the Freljord should return to raw, bloody chaos. Each time he intervenes, a new warband forms around his worship, and an old truce dies. Orn, by contrast, retreats deeper into his volcanic forge, answering only when mortals drag his name into oaths or craft. Anivia appears in omens, in blizzards that arrive a day too early, or melt a path at the last possible moment. She nudges events, but rarely takes centre stage. I'm only speculating here, but this distance may be deliberate. Too much divine attention might crack the Watcher's prison. In the shadows, the Frost Guard makes sure that never happens. While other tribes remember the Howling Abyss as a haunted pass or a cursed bridge, Frostguard scouts quietly divert migrations away from it. Skalds who get too close to the truth about the Three Sisters find their songs corrected, or they simply vanish in a snowstorm that only the Frostguard seemed prepared for. When rival chiefs move toward real unification, mysterious assassinations or perfectly timed monster attacks reignite old hatreds. The power structures stay unstable. The prison stays undisturbed. Outside powers barely notice. Early Shuriman explorers mark the Freljord as a harsh, unprofitable frontier. Too little arable land, too much risk, not enough immediate magic or gold. Later, even ambitious Noxian generals see more value in Ionia or Piltover's trade routes than in frozen, stubborn clans. That neglect is a blessing for Lysandra. No empire digs too deep. No archivist cross-checks the myths she rewrote. So, how did all these threads connect? You now have a realm locked in an unnatural winter. The Watchers imprisoned beneath the Howling Abyss. An immortal Lysandra directing the Frostguard, and tribes divided by stories she edited. This long, undocumented era is the slow heartbeat between cataclysms. It normalizes the endless war so completely that, in current times, champions like Ashe, Sejuani, Tryndamere, and Lysandra herself step into a stage that has been meticulously prepared for millennia. And when the world finally starts paying attention again, it assumes it's watching the beginning of a conflict, not the final act of something unimaginably old. Modern champions, ancient shadows, Ashe, Sejuani, and Lysandra. So, how did that ancient script turn into the faces you actually recognise on the rift? In current times, the Freljord's endless war is carried by 3 modern champions who are essentially walking echoes of the Three Sisters. First, Ashe. To most tribes, she is the new Avarosa, a young but visionary war mother who believes the Freljord can be united without burning itself down. She hears supposed visions of Avarosa in dreams and omens, guiding her toward alliances instead of massacres. Her bow is not just a weapon, it's a legendary relic said to be carved from true ice tied to Avarosa's legacy, a physical reminder that mercy once ruled this frozen realm. When Ashe negotiates with outcast tribes or spares enemies that older chiefs would have executed, she's reenacting a story she doesn't even know was edited. Opposite her stands Sejuani, spiritual heir of Serilda, where Ashe grew up with prophecy and fragile hope. Sejuani grew up with starvation, treachery, and raids in the dark. In order to keep her people alive, she embraced a brutal truth. Mercy does not fill bellies in an endless winter. For her, only relentless strength, conquest, and fear can guarantee survival. She rides a Druvask boar into battle, leads the winter's claw through blizzards that would kill most mortals, and sees treaties as traps. If Ashe is the dream of unity, Sejuani is the memory of betrayal made flesh. Then there is Lysandra. Publicly, she is not a queen or a general, but an almost mythic high priestess of the Frostguard. She is rarely seen, always veiled in ritual and frost, rumoured to commune with ancient, immensely powerful entities beneath the ice. To the outside world, the Frostguard are guardians who protect the Freljord from forgotten threats in the Howling Abyss. Their remote temples, their secretive magic, their warnings about things best left buried all reinforce this image. I'm only speculating here, but for most people in Runeterra, Lysandra is less a person and more a religious concept. The tragic symmetry is that Ashe and Sejuani are fighting over methods while reacting to the same hostile environment. Both see a realm locked in unnatural winter, haunted by half-remembered myths about founders and monsters. Both believe their legends are pure history. Neither knows that this environment, their hunger, even their contradictory songs about Avarosa and Cyrilda were engineered by Lysandra's choices and cover-ups. So, how did they end up reenacting an ancient civil war on command? Because the script was never destroyed, only redacted. And beneath them, the real stage waits. The howling abyss, where you play Aram, is not just a bridge. It is the prison door for the watchers. Every step toward true confrontation or genuine unity between Ash, Sejuani and Lysandra adds pressure to that lock. The closer these three leaders get to resolving the Freljord's fate, the more the ancient shadows beneath the ice begin to stir. The Frost Guard's true mission: guardians, jailers, or traitors. Above that prison door, one group claims to stand watch for all the Freljord. The Frost Guard present themselves as solemn protectors, the last keepers of ancient knowledge in a realm that has forgotten its own history. Publicly they tell you they maintain wards and barriers against vague, nameless evils buried under the ice. So, how did they earn that reputation? Over centuries, Frostguard priests and seers positioned themselves as experts in rituals, true ice, and the old tongues. They alone know which runes to carve into glacier stone, which offerings to cast into the howling abyss winds, which spells keep the storms from swallowing entire tribes. In order to appear indispensable, they made sure every chieftain, from Avarosan allies to Winter's Claw raiders, believed that without these rites, something immensely powerful would awaken. Essentially, that public story is not entirely a lie, but it is only the surface. In truth, the Frostguard are Lysandra's cult. Their real oath is not to the Freljord, but to the Pale Witch herself and to the secret beneath the bridge. Their core mission is to maintain the prison of the Watchers, to patrol the howling abyss, and to prevent anyone from tampering with the seals, or even understanding what those seals truly hold. This is why records vanish when they mention the three sisters. This is why storytellers disappear after claiming the howling abyss was once a sacred meeting place, not a tomb. The Frostguard's libraries are full of redacted sagas and altered myths, all carefully edited to erase Lysandra's betrayal and her pact with those void-like entities. You get fragments in current times, contradictory tales of Avarosa, Cyrilda, and an unnamed third sister, but never the full truth. Here is the duality at the heart of their mission. On one hand, they really are jailers. They maintain the enchantments that keep the Watchers frozen in place, locked in a moment of failed invasion that still scars the world's climate. Without the Frostguard, the unnatural eternal winter of the Freljord could shift into something far worse, a complete reshaping of Runeterra into a lifeless frozen realm. On the other hand, those same rituals preserve Lysandra's power and the political conditions she prefers. By monopolizing true ice, by controlling who can approach the abyss, the Frostguard help keep the Freljord divided into rival banners. Ash and Sejuani remain focused on each other, not on the cliff where the world nearly ended. Is that protection or manipulation? Now we reach the question no saga can answer. Is Lysandra still truly committed to keeping the Watchers sealed, or is she carefully managing their prison to time an awakening she believes she can survive? Official law confirms that she lied about the past, murdered her sisters, and turned the howling abyss into a lock. It confirms the Frostguard serve her, not the people. I'm only speculating here, but the way she hoards knowledge, tests mortals, and lets the Freljord's war burn just hot enough suggests she may be preparing for another choice point. Is she buying time to strengthen the prison, or to decide when to open it? The next clues come from the cracks already forming in the ice, and from those who dare to question her. Because somewhere in those frozen archives, someone has started to read the parts she tried to erase. and the howling abyss. Today, ARAM, pilgrims and cracks in the seal. In current times, when you queue into a quick brawl on the howling abyss, you're stepping onto one of the most feared places in the Freljord. For the people who actually live in this frozen realm, that bridge is not a playground. It's a pilgrimage site built over an ancient mistake. Warriors march there from Avarosan villages, from Winter's Claw warbands, and from scattered tribes that don't answer to Ash or Sejuani at all. Shamans arrive wrapped in charms of bone and ice, Frostguard acolytes in dark blue robes, whispering Lysandra's censored prayers. Each group comes for something different. Visions, power, or absolution for blood spilled in endless tribal raids. So, how did a single bridge become a spiritual crossroads for half the north? Essentially because everyone feels that something down there is watching them back. In order to maintain the story, the Frostguard say, "The battles on the abyss, honour the dead and strengthen the Freljord's resolve." That's only half true. In lore, every duel, every war chant, every ritual sacrifice of weapons and blood on those stones pushes raw magic into the seal below. The bridge is a conduit. Each clash sends shockwaves through the ice, feeding the lock that holds the Watchers, and stress testing it. Imagine hammering on a door to make sure it stays shut, while hoping the hinges don't finally give way. Champion stories hint at how thin that margin really is. Ash feels an inexplicable dread when the wind shifts there, as if the storm itself is choosing sides. Brahm jokes and smiles, but even he hears distant wordless cries, echoing under the roar of the gale. Some Frostguard report whispers in languages no mortal throat could form. Others glimpse impossible shapes moving in the blizzard, towering silhouettes that don't match any known spirit or beast. I'm only speculating here, but the fact that so many immensely powerful entities react to this place in such personal ways suggests the Watchers are not just sealed, they are aware and waiting. Beneath all of this lies the frozen colossus you see beneath the bridge. In universe, stories disagree. Some say it's a dead god from before the Freljord had a name. Others insist it's a demon frozen mid-escape from the spirit realm. The truth is worse. That shape is a Watcher caught mid-emergence, locked in the instant Lysandra turned on her masters and entombed them in a continent of ice. Pattern interrupt here. What happens if the Freljord actually stops fighting? If Ash, Sejuani, and even the scattered tribes somehow unite, the flow of chaotic battle magic into the abyss could change overnight. The seal that has been calibrated around constant conflict might suddenly weaken or overload. And if some ambitious mage, warlord, or forgotten Frostguard heretic tampers with the abyss in search of more power, the balance could shift in a single catastrophic moment. The next time the ice cracks, it may not stop where the bridge ends. Demigods and troll kings, misremembered echoes of the Watchers. And that brings us to a stranger question. If the abyss is a lock, then what are all these other gods roaming the Freljord actually echoing? Trundle is a good place to start. On the surface, he is a troll chieftain who stole a throne. In the stories, he gains his crown when he claims a massive frozen club from a so-called troll god buried in the ice. So, how did a wandering troll suddenly wield a weapon that warps his tribe's fate? The club is described as cursed, impossibly cold, and humming with ancient magic. Essentially, it behaves less like a simple relic and more like a shard of something older, an artifact that could have been tainted when the Watchers first pushed their power into this realm. In order to understand why that matters, you have to look at Volibear's modern portrayal. Once, he was remembered as a straightforward storm and war spirit. In current times, his lore leans into something more eldritch, a hulking half-rotted god of thunder who rejects civilization, scars his own worshippers, and tears down any structure mortals build. His raw, destructive nature feels primal, but it also accidentally mirrors the Watcher's goal. They want to erase ordered reality, to grind cities, laws, and memory into a single frozen stillness. Volibear is not their servant, yet every temple he destroys, every village he drags back into blood and snow, weakens the fragile order standing between Runeterra and the Abyss. Against that, you have Anivia and Ornn, two demigods who function almost as counterweights. Anivia's endless cycle of death and rebirth is more than a poetic myth. It is a built-in reset button for the Freljord's spiritual climate. When winters grow too long or wars too brutal, her return signals movement, thaw, and change. Ornn, by contrast, hides in his forge, shaping weapons, hearths, and even mountains. His stubborn isolation actually stabilizes the realm. He creates lasting structures that resist the absolute stillness the Watchers crave. These immensely powerful entities do not care about Lyssandra's schemes, yet their very existence keeps the spiritual ecosystem from tipping entirely into oblivion. I'm only speculating here, but this is where the myths blur. Speculative aside, what if some of the gods and monsters of the north were never true primordials at all? A beast that slept too close to the abyss, a mortal hero who carried a splinter of frozen Watcher power, a tribe warped by a buried relic. Over centuries, each could be retold as a demigod or demon. When your world is saturated with half-remembered catastrophes, how would you tell the difference? Remember, Lysandra spent millennia scrambling the record. Songs were rewritten, runestones recarved, entire bloodlines renamed. So, how did ordinary Freljordians respond? They kept telling stories, but those stories no longer lined up. One clan's protective spirit is another clan's devouring monster. A troll god could be a twisted echo of the Watchers, or just an unlucky titan frozen in the wrong place. This is the real horror of the Freljord's misremembered history. When demigod, demon, and Watcher echo all share the same frozen stage, no one can be entirely sure which power they are actually feeding with worship, blood, or war. And in a land where every legend might hide an ancient betrayal, the next god that answers could be something far worse than a storm or a phoenix. The question is, when that happens, will anyone recognize the pattern in time, or will they mistake the Watcher's return for just another northern myth come to life? Endless war as strategy. Why peace might be the real threat. So, how did the Freljord go from a united god-slaying realm to an endless carousel of raids, feuds, and civil wars? When you zoom out, a disturbing pattern appears. Every time the north edges toward large-scale unity, something snaps it back into scattered, warring tribes. You saw it with the original three sisters. Avarosa, Cyrilda, and Lysandra defeated immensely powerful entities from beyond the ice, and for a brief moment the Freljord moved as one. Then came Lysandra's betrayal, the Watcher's near emergence, and the shattering of that alliance into rival legacies. Centuries later, when Ash starts stitching tribes together under a new Avarosan banner, Sejuani hardens the Winter's Claw in direct opposition, and the Frostguard quietly feed both sides, just enough magic and myth to keep them from ever fully merging. Essentially, whenever a single banner starts to look inevitable, the world throws up a counterweight, a charismatic war leader, a forgotten prophecy, a sudden catastrophe. Is that coincidence or strategy? In order to answer that, you have to look at what endless war actually accomplishes. As long as the Freljord is locked in conflict, no one has the time, resources, or trust to seriously investigate the howling abyss. Tribes are too busy surviving winters, defending borders, and arguing over which ancient queen was right. A united North could march scholars, shamans, and entire armies to that bridge and test every ward. Instead, the howling abyss remains a distant holy scar where mortals go to prove bravery or die. Convenient if you are a prison that must never be closely examined. That same war justifies the Frost Guard's secrecy. There are raiders at the gates, rival queens on the horizon, and rumours of trolls and demigods in the passes. In such a world, who questions an immortal order that claims to protect sacred sites and hoard forbidden knowledge? Their monopoly on history, magic, and the abyss itself is tolerated because this is not the time to ask what they're really guarding, or who. I'm only speculating here, but what if the Watchers are not entirely dormant? The lore already hints that their presence twists the climate into an unnatural eternal winter. If they can warp weather, could they nudge a blizzard to ruin a peace summit? If their thoughts leak into dreams, could a chief wake up convinced that mercy is weakness and honour demands blood? Small pushes over centuries would be enough to tilt leaders toward choices that prolong conflict rather than resolve it. And that leads to the most chilling question of all. If Ash actually succeeded in uniting the Freljord under one banner, would that strength finally secure the North, or concentrate so much power, faith, and magic in one place that it strains the very lock of the howling abyss? In current times, every victory she wins might be another stone pried loose from that prison door. If the day comes when the Freljord truly stands together, will it be to defend Runeterra or to witness the Watchers step through? Foreshadowing the next cataclysm. Threads pointing to the Watchers' return. If that unity ever happens, the ice will answer first. In current times, the Freljord is already whispering that something beneath the howling abyss is awake again. Sailors on the northern seas report storms that appear from a clear sky, spiralling around an invisible point and freezing masts solid in seconds. Whole glacier faces have sheared away overnight, revealing black, glassy stone that doesn't match any known rock in this realm. So, how did an eternal prison start showing cracks? The people closest to the abyss feel it most. Frostguard scouts vanish on routine patrols, their last reports describing distant songs under the wind or a pressure in their minds, like a thought that isn't theirs. Shamans from scattered tribes share the same prophetic dreams, a vast eye opening under the ice and Runeterra's stars going dark one by one. Essentially, after millennia of muffled silence, the Watchers are pushing back against their chains, and that pressure bleeds into mortal senses as storms, shifting ice, and nightmares. Lysandra's own stories point straight at this brewing crisis. Her bio and the Frostguard tales show her doubling down on secrecy, sending her followers on deeper and riskier missions into the abyss. They maintain the lock, but they also chip at the edges, studying the ancient magic that froze those immensely powerful entities in place. I'm only speculating here, but the way her cult hoards relics, silences witnesses, and rewrites songs again suggests preparation, not just for containment, but for choosing the moment of release. Other champions keep brushing that same buried threat. Ash's encounters with Frostguard advisors always end with half-truths about protecting the North. Sejuani's raids near Forbidden Ruins draw unnatural blizzards that even her hardened warriors fear. Even Brahm's cheerful legends mention doors of unmelting ice and things that knock back when you knock first. In order to understand their stories, you have to see them as ripples from a single submerged source. There's also a broader pattern in Riot's narrative design. Ancient sealed horrors in this world rarely stay background decoration. The void in Icathia, the Darkin trapped in weapons, Mordecaiser building his own death realm, Each re-emerges when multiple regions' storylines converge. Today, you have void activity in Shurima and Ionia, Darkin weapons resurfacing, and a northern prison originally tied to void-like entities. The Freljord is perfectly positioned as the next focal point where these threads meet, and if the north falls, the stakes are global. The Freljord's brutal climate and stubborn tribes form a natural buffer between the rest of Runeterra and whatever stirs in that abyss. Should the civil war weaken every faction, or worse, deliver them into Lysandra's hands, there may be no one left to hold that line when the ice finally breaks. The Endless War, then, isn't just a regional tragedy. It's the thin, chaotic margin between the Watcher's first failed invasion and a second attempt, one carefully timed and potentially successful, to rewrite the entire world in ice. From primordial betrayal to present day, completing the Freljord timeline. So how did we get from a single crack in the ice to an entire realm locked in permanent war? To finish the Freljord's story, you need to see the whole arc at once, from primordial chaos all the way to the champions you queue into in Aram. At the very beginning, before the Sisters, the North was raw and unshaped, ruled by ancient, immensely powerful entities and half-remembered gods of Storm and Fang. Then Avarosa, Cyrilda and Lysandra rose as witches strong enough to challenge those forces. They united scattered mortals, broke the rule of old demigods, and, for a brief, impossible moment, the Freljord stood as a single coordinated power. That unity drew attention. First contact with the Watchers turned the howling abyss from a sacred meeting place into a doorway. In order to secure more magic and power, Lysandra bargained with those frozen minds, promising them Runeterra itself. When the invasion began, she betrayed both sides at once, shattering the bridge, entombing the Watchers beneath the ice and drowning her own armies in the catastrophe. The cost was everything. Avarosa and Cyrilda died, the land cracked, and the memory of what truly happened was methodically erased. Songs were rewritten, myths were split. Instead of one story of 3 sisters and a cosmic betrayal, you get 3 competing legends and an endless winter no one can fully explain. Essentially, the shattering of the Freljord wasn't just political. It was historical amnesia weaponized. From there, ages of fragmented tribes followed. Avarosan heirs, Winter's Claw raiders, scattered troll kingdoms and cults. Each clung to a different, edited version of the past. Above them, the Frostguard watched the howling abyss, publicly claiming to guard the world, secretly serving Lysandra's will, and maintaining both the prison and the lies holding it together. In current times, that whole compressed timeline plays out again in miniature. Ash trying to reunify the Freljord through oaths and diplomacy mirrors Avarosa's dream. Sejuani, leading the Winter's Claw by strength and hardship, echoes Cyrilda's harsher creed. Lysandra herself endures in the shadows, an immortal architect of forgetting, while the Frostguard quietly manipulate both sides to keep the war hot but never decisive. Around them the demigods watch from the margins. Volibear still rages against any ordered future. Anivia dies and is reborn with every great cycle, a living warning that the ice can always return. Ornn forges alone, shaping weapons and artifacts that may decide the next turning of this conflict. I'm only speculating here, but even Bram's impossible strength or Trundle's stolen iceborne power might be small ripples of that ancient buried struggle. So the big picture is this. The Freljord's endless war is the visible symptom of an invisible cosmic-scale conflict between mortal agency, demigod will, and the cold logic of the Watchers beneath the ice. Every raid, every alliance, every duel on that bridge is a minor adjustment in a much larger equation. Within current canon, you've now walked through every major confirmed event that defines the Freljord's history and its role in Runeterra's future, from pre-sister chaos to unity to betrayal to shattering to the uneasy stalemate of today. The question is, how does that change the way you see its champions? When you look at Ashe, Sejuani, Lysandra, Braum, Trundle, Volibear, Anivia, or Ornn now, you're not just seeing isolated characters. You're seeing the living endpoints of a timeline stretching back to the first scream in the Howling Abyss. And this is where we can finally step back and reflect on what that means for the wars still to come. What happens if the ice breaks? Open questions and theories. And once you see them as endpoints of that ancient catastrophe, one question hangs over the entire realm. What happens if the ice breaks? Essentially, everything in the Freljord turns on a few unresolved, terrifying uncertainties. Is Lysandra still a reluctant jailer, the last barrier between Runeterra and the Watchers? Or has she become a patient collaborator, waiting for the perfect moment to open the door she built? The Frostguard preach protection, but their hidden rituals around the Howling Abyss feel much closer to maintenance of a weapon than simple guardianship. So, how did this prison become so fragile? The Howling Abyss was once a sacred meeting place, then an emergency lock hammered into being after the Three Sisters' War. In order to hold the Watchers, Lysandra froze her own allies and buried an entire era of history. But the ice is not timeless. Cracks appear in legends, in Aram matches framed as endless battles on a bridge that is actually the lid of a cosmic grave. I'm only speculating here, but one plausible future is a failed unification attempt that literally shakes the lock. Imagine Ashe finally rallying Avarosan, Winter's Claw, and scattered tribes under a single banner. A final siege at the Abyss, Sejuani charging, Lysandra cornered, old songs about Avarosa and Cyrilda resurfacing. Victory seems close, until the combined magic and violence fracture the ancient bindings. Not a full release, just a wound in the seal, enough for a watcher's eye to open beneath the ice. Another scenario pushes in the opposite direction. A desperate alliance. A partially awakened watcher reaches up, warping the blizzards, twisting trolls and beasts, turning the Freljord's own winter into a weapon. In current times, you could see Ashe and Sejuani forced into an uneasy truce, with Volibear sensing a rival, storming south to tear apart this new intruder. Anivia and Ornn might intervene as old powers of the north, standing beside mortals for the first time in millennia. How would the rest of the world respond to that? Noxus would almost certainly try to exploit the chaos, sending legions and war mages to seize territory or harvest forbidden magic from the cracking abyss. Demacia, terrified of arcane power, might dismiss northern rumours as the superstition until it is nearly too late. Ionia, focused on its own spiritual balance, could underestimate the threat as just another distant war. Only Targon's celestial entities, watching for void disturbances, might truly understand what a stirring watcher means, and even then, they might intervene only at the last possible moment. All of this, to be clear, is speculation layered on top of specific hints. Lysandra's erased history, the abyss as a lock, the unnatural, eternal winter. The exact future isn't written. So where would you take it if you were writing the next Freljord event? Would you risk breaking the ice to finally end the war? Or keep the tribes divided to hold the Watchers down one more generation? Because the real question is whether the Freljord's salvation and its destruction are actually the same story, just told to different survivors. Choose your banner, Freljord factions, final thoughts, and next lore deep dives, and you've just walked that entire razor's edge. In just over an hour, you went from cosmic creation and world runes all the way down into a single frozen bridge in the far north. You've seen how Aurelian Sol's stars, Shurima's sun disk, the void rifts of Icathia, the the Darkin, the Ruination, and the Rune Wars all cascade forward until they crash into the Freljord's eternal storm. Essentially, the Freljord isn't an isolated region. It's the pressure point where Runeterra's oldest mistakes are still pushing upward through the ice. So, how did that change the way you see its three banners? In order to understand the choice in front of you, you have to reframe each faction in the shadow of the Watchers. The Avarosans, under Ash, promise unity, diplomacy, and a gentler future. On the surface, it's nation-building. Underneath, it's a bet that a truly united realm can survive whatever immensely powerful entities wake beneath the howling abyss. The Winter's Claw, led by Sejuani, embraces brutal survivalism. If the world is ending anyway, you harden your people into weapons. And the Frost Guard? They are cold pragmatism made into a cult, guarding secrets Lysandra buried when she rewrote the North's ancient songs. I'm only speculating here, but if you stand on that Aram bridge in your mind and look down, each banner is really an answer to the same question. What do mortals owe to sleeping gods of oblivion? Do you negotiate, resist, or quietly prepare to open the door? So now, I want you to choose. Knowing the true, hidden history behind each tribe, which Freljord faction would you join, and why? Would you march under Avarosan blue, trying to heal a world that doesn't even remember its own betrayals? Would you ride with the Winter's Claw, trusting raw strength over forgotten prophecies? Or would you take the Frost Guard's offer, trading comfort and honesty for insider knowledge of what is really moving beneath the ice? Tell your choice in the comments and explain the reasoning. In current times, that explanation is where you really prove you understand this lore. This deep dive is only one chapter in a much larger story. If you want to stay with the Watcher's theme, we can go further into the Void itself, Kassadin, Kai'Sa, Vel'Koz, and what those entities are actually doing to Runeterra's fabric. Or we can go upward instead to Mount Targon's Celestials and see how aspects and star-forged dragons judge worlds like this. Eventually, we can even map a full Runeterra-wide timeline, stitching Noxus, Ionia, Shurima, and the Shadow Isles onto the same canvas you used here. Pattern interrupt for you before we close. The next time you queue into Aram, remember that Bridge was once a sacred meeting place, then a battlefield, and finally a lock. Somewhere far below your champion's feet, frozen watchers are still listening, and the Freljord's next choice, your choice of banner, might decide whether they keep dreaming or finally wake up. So, which side are you on?